Art of the Rural is honored to support 5 Plain Questions. We are a collaborative organization that works to resource artists and culture bearers across the country. Together, we build relationships, change narratives, and bridge divides. Across the last 15 years, we've collaborated with individuals and communities from a range of cultural and geographic backgrounds to contribute towards a more equitable and healthy future for rural and Indian country. We invite folks to check out some of our work. Our Rural-Urban Exchange strengthens intercultural networks through a locally focused creative leadership program. Our Spillway Initiative supports artists and culture bearers to cultivate relationships along the upper Mississippi River region. And our High Visibility Initiative creates podcasts, exhibitions, and publications that share nuanced and complex perspectives on contemporary life in rural and Indian country. If folks would like to learn more about our work, please visit artoftherural.org.
Hello, and welcome again to another episode of 5 Plain Questions, a podcast that proposes 5 questions to Indigenous artists, creators, musicians, writers, movers and shakers, and culture bearers, people in the community that are doing great things for their communities. I'm Joe Williams, your host for this conversation. My goal is to showcase these amazing people from our Indigenous communities from around the region and country. I want to introduce you to Suzan Shown Harjo. Suzan Shown Harjo is a Cheyenne citizen. Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Muscogee. She is a 6-decade champion for Native rights, founder and president of the Morningstar Institute, and former executive director of the National Congress of the American Indians and Native American Rights Fund. She helped win landmark laws like the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1979, the National Museum of the American Indian Act of 1989, and Native American Graves Protection Act of 1990. Harjo led campaigns to end Native mascots, helped return over 1 million acres of indigenous land, and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2014. She remains a leading voice for indigenous culture and legal rights. So, with that said, let's jump into part 1 of our conversation with Suzan Shown Harjo. Thank you so much again for coming back onto the podcast. And yeah, we'll jump into that first question. If you could introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and a little bit about what it is that you do.
I'm Cheyenne and Hodulgee, Muscogee, and like my mother, I'm a Cheyenne citizen of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma, and I was raised in part by her parents in our Cheyenne Treaty Reservation territory. Of the 1867 Medicine Lodge Creek Treaty, whose first signatory was my mother's grandfather, my mother's great-grandfather. So my mother's grandfather, and then I was also raised by my dad's parents on the Muscogee side in the Muscogee Treaty Reservation allotment farmland, a working farm just south of Tulsa between Okmulgee and Beggs. And with my grandparents, that was in my hometown, which is El Reno, Oklahoma, about 25 miles due west of Oklahoma City. And my brothers and I had twin brothers who were 5 years younger, and we were also raised by our parents. Sometimes when they got assignments in the military that they thought we would like, they would ask if we wanted to go, and they asked if we wanted to go to Hawaii when we were little kids, and we said, "Oh yeah, what is it? Let's go." And if we wanted to go to Napoli, Italia. And Dad had a big map and showed us this big map, and we couldn't even see Tulsa or Oklahoma City on it. It just had a star within this little state of Oklahoma. And then this huge area, another huge area that was the Atlantic Ocean, And we already knew oceans from being in the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii. And we knew what tropical life was. We took hula lessons. We hung out with Native Hawaiian kids, learned a bit of the pidgin English that the Native Hawaiians spoke at the time with a mixture of their own language and American slang. And we made leis, the traditional leis, which were, it involved hiking and going to other islands and picking certain flowers and certain leaves and it with a great deal of ceremoniousness, and then making those different kinds of leis, which was no small feat. And all of that was really instructive and enjoyable. And we felt like we were home with our cousins, with the Native Hawaiian people we knew, certainly with all the kids. And we felt great kinship. And then going to Italy was quite wonderful, but scary. I mean, at night on the ship going over, at that point where the light goes out of the horizon and it's just dark ocean. All you can see is dark ocean and dark sky, and then you have brilliant stars. And then you have a huge splash, and what was that? And more huge splashes, and what was that? Because what drew you to the ship side was to see in the evening and afternoon the dolphins playing. But these weren't dolphins playing. This was whale-size splash, and you could only imagine because you couldn't even see an outline. So it was pretty frightening, and but not as much as getting off the ship and onto the streets of Napoli, where people were dying. I mean, literally dropping like flies in front of you and around you in the wharf area from the Asian flu. And then just seeing Vesuvio on one end of on the south end of the Bay of Naples, and understanding that was a volcano, and even before we had gone to Pompeii and Herculaneum and into the volcano, we literally with several guides and other families went in, not on our first day, but in that first few months, went inside. You climb up Vesuvio and you go inside the thing. I don't know if you can still do this. I hope not. And you're on a ledge that's circular, and it's going around to a certain point. And the farther down you get, you don't go down very far, or we didn't, but the farther down you got, the thicker the sulfur was, and the more green you got on your hands and your clothes. So there was a lot of activity, even though, I mean, you had to think this is a live volcano. I mean, what if? So we were very relieved. We felt brave, but
Sure.
Once we got back farther north than Pompeii, we felt that we had escaped something that might have been disastrous. So
Wow.
everything was new, every single thing. And what I really enjoyed in Italy and in other places, because I got to be on a exchange program that was a trimester system in our school. And so I was in Ankara and Izmir, in Wiesbaden, Germany, in Highgate, London, and in Verona and Vicenza. So we had that kind of exchange program with students. I would go to the family of the student that was going to my family, and that was the exchange in each of these places. And sometimes there were people like Turkish people, sometimes Americans living in Turkey, you just didn't know ahead of time, or maybe they had it on paper, but you didn't understand what that would mean. But everywhere I went, it was especially in all around the Mediterranean. So in Italy and Spain and Portugal and Morocco, and Greece, all of the Mediterranean countries, especially, I would uh, think how similar the people were to our native people. Very tribal, lots of just kinship, lots of relations was everything. Respect was everything. A lot of commonalities, respect, love, kindness, courage, the values that people hold, and prize and admire in others. Uh, those I saw everywhere. Less so in Germany, but I think that's because the Nazis had tried to kill my father in World War II.
Sure.
And tried to kill them, and they probably both succeeded. As my dad fought from North Africa up Sicily and up to Monte Cassino, where he almost lost his legs, but he did not. Uh, and that was with a company that was made up primarily of other boys from Chilocco Indian School, where my dad and mom went and where they met. And mom was a couple of classes ahead of dad. And when he went to World War II as a sophomore, she went to Haskell, which is now Haskell Indian Nations University. And she went to the business college. So she didn't have to be a beautician. But what they meant by business college was grooming you to be a super secretary. And that came back to haunt me when I was in Italy, and the history teacher and the English teacher recommended to my parents, just by sign this form, that I take a typing class, because my handwriting was terrible. And they thought, I mean, not to me, but to them, and they thought that I could just move faster, I could think faster if I typed, I could get it down on paper. So my mother objected mightily. She absolutely wouldn't do it. And we had to have a meeting with the principal and a counselor and several teachers and other teachers. The music teacher was called in because almost upon landing in Napoli, there'd been a school contest for a school song because they didn't have a school song. And the school teacher, the music teacher, Signora Marjorie Di Giovanni, had written music, and you had to submit lyrics for the music. Well, I won, and which was pretty funny because I was such a lowly person in the school, and as a seventh grader, and the other people people would tell me, like the captain of of the basketball team said he was certain he would win because he was the captain of the team. And, people were used to being really good at what they did. And then here I came. And so everyone embraced me because I won this, and how nice for me. So that got to be a beautiful thing. But the music teacher chimed in and said, since I was this minor celeb in the school, that and my parents trusted her because it was her music to the school, of course. And I was singing with her and, learning more about my instrument that I was taking at the time, two, clarinet and guitar. So my mother said, once you take a typing class, you will always type. People will look at you as a typist, and that's what you'll be. And it'll be very hard to break that. And she was speaking as someone who had actually surmounted that problem by her first job out of the box was the executive secretary, which at this time would be called the second vice president or something, to the president of McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. And that was a mighty job. And they loved the girls from Haskell because they were teaching them wartime skills, confidentiality, loyalty. I mean, they, things that they probably already knew, and they were refining those, and how to behave in wartime, and how to make the same impression, how to be yourself, how not to lie, all of these things that you hope your kids are being taught somewhere. And she actually was being taught those kinds of things, and had that kind of job. But she was very smart, and she knew that she would never be able to break through that clerical wall. So she was just committed to not letting me take a typing class. And finally, I guess just everyone else wore her down. And I said I didn't mind. I thought it was be a good thing, and that I was pretty strong. And also I was a competitive, by that time I was a competitive swimmer, ocean swimmer. And I was as well teaching a class of little kids how to swim. So I was really an adult kind of 11 and 12-year-old. So anyway, I started typing, and by golly, I've never stopped. I was always the fastest typist in any office where I ever worked. I could out-type any secretary or typer I ever had in the office. And I was very proud of that, because I could really do that. That was a thing I could really do.
Sure.
But it wasn't the thing that my mother had predicted, although she was correct that it would serve me my lifelong. So I was very grateful for that, and for her obstinance, because that said a lot and taught me a lot. And so that all of these things I loved about Italy. And coming back to the United States, I found that the white kids in Tulsa and the white kids in Oklahoma City were not smarter than we were. They didn't know more stuff than we did, because my whole idea had been, if I didn't know something, it would be, the white kids in Tulsa, they know this. I have to learn this. I have to catch up. It wasn't so much that I or we, my cousins, my brothers, people we worked with on the farm, it wasn't that we thought anyone was smarter. It was that we thought we just hadn't been exposed to that. We just didn't know. And as soon as we knew, then we were caught up. Then we all knew the same thing. But I kept looking around thinking, where did these kids come from? They didn't know much, and certainly didn't know the kinds of things that I knew and had learned without even realizing that I had been having an education in Italy. And so that a very important time in my life, and sort of set in motion almost everything that I do now and have done since.
I imagine at that age that has to be really empowering. It really had to have started a confidence that really carried you forward after that.
Well, before, now, my dad, on one of his visits, since he had been a boxer in the Army, taught me some boxing moves, because we were talking about bullies, and when we would go into Beggs or into Muscogee, some of the white kids would try to beat up on us.
Sure.
And so he taught, the boys knew how to fight, and I didn't. I was strong, really strong, and flexible and all of that, but I didn't have those skills. And Dad taught me some moves, and they would scare people when I start. And how you knock someone out by going for that spot, how
Sure.
you do this, how you do that. And it was just a few things that he thought I had to learn, and he thought this will be fine. He said, and it's for anything, whoever is giving you a hard time. So talk about empowering. I mean, that kind of thing was really empowering. I knew I knew from my grandparents how to behave in public so that you avoided a physical confrontation. And part of it was just banter.
Hmm.
And part of it was not disrespecting the person who was disrespecting you.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's a hard lesson. It's a really hard lesson when your blood's up and you say, wait a minute, these people are trying to kill me. And do not wish me well. What do I do? Well, I was equipped by all sorts of people who knew how to tell me or show me how to deal with that, and did it in such a way that it was really kind of fun. I mean, everyone who taught me things that I learned from um, were not pedantic. They weren't uh, insistent. They weren't crude. They weren't mean. They were fun and made everything enticing. So who wouldn't like that? I mean, who wouldn't prefer that way of being taught? So,
Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, it's about having good mentors, but also being a good mentee. Being someone that's engaged both ways. With that said, let's talk about your biggest influences. As we move through our lives, I think our who influences us and what influences us sort of comes in different phases of our lives. And I was wondering if you could share with us who some of your biggest influences have been and what is influencing you today.
well, both sets of grandparents, of course, and my parents, and um, aunts and uncles, especially the one uncle who became kind of famous on the activist scene when he was sort of the guru of AIM, Philip Deere, who was he was actually a Methodist preacher in the Methodist church where they spoke only Muscogee, and he was our clan uncle who was from the grounds, Nuyaka tribal grounds, that where he was the singing doctor, the Yahola, and he would say things like, "Don't believe anything you read, but read everything and read it really carefully. You never know what uh, about the mind of the white man. You never know what they put in writing that they're thinking about differently." And his example for that was in our treaty. It says the river is ours from bank to bank. And he said, we had no idea that we meant the Bank of the River and they meant the Bank of America. So he would tell us in those ways that we really understood. And okay, you know what to look for. What sounds the same but isn't? What has a double meaning? Where is their trickery? Put yourself in the mind of someone who's trying to do you harm. How do you understand what that is? By part of it is reading very carefully. So I think a lot of Native people really got that lesson from their elders about not believing what you read or being such a good reader that you understood how to be discerning about what you were reading. You understood the nuance, you understood shadings of truth, because many, many people I know and have worked with and been friends with and who've become part of my extended family also know have been reading treaties since they were children, have been reciting certain tribal laws, have been reciting parts of treaties and lines from treaties, have been articulating our rights, and it just barely without prompting or without prompters. So, and I mean, I've worked with more people, more Native people who have that background and have that skill than otherwise. And so the first thing is that, what's your profession? Well, I'm a reader. That's really the very first thing. I'm a reader, and from that you become a writer. From that you become all sorts of things. Some things you want to become, and some things you just sort of fall into. So my cousins, my brothers, were all were and are all sorts of had a heavy influence on me, because a lot of we were learning together about a lot of things and thinking out loud, which is always a way to develop close ties, and how you're influencing each other when you really are trying to figure something out. So family, and then some teachers, a fifth grade teacher who looked around and saw that there were about 20 of us in her class of 30 who were named Susan. And so she did a very smart thing. She got everyone to change their name, who wanted to. And everyone wanted to, except one of the people named Susan, who kept the name Susan. And the teacher was suggesting some alternatives to Susan. And my dad always called me Susan Lee because I was named after his favorite sister, Essie Lee. And my mother called me Suzanne because she kind of was a Francophile and put a French twist to everything. And so I was already Suzanne, but I didn't like all the extra letters, so I just changed the S to the middle S to Z. And so that's been my name. And it's been, I know I would have been a very different person if I had just stayed Susan. So that teacher, whose name I cannot remember, not Susan, though, not Suzanne, that teacher was very influential on me, for me. And I mean, what's more personal than your name? And so she's one of the people who named me, in effect. Another teacher, Miss Bell, when I was in 7th and 8th and 9th grades in Italy, taught English. She was from Texas, had a real strong Texas drawl, wore cowboy boots, and was pretty much a cowwoman. And she taught English through, one trimester would be the sonnets of Shakespeare. Another would be comedies, and she'd select one of them or teach many. Another would be the tragedies or the histories. And you went through them all and got a smattering of familiarity with the whole of the canon by the time you finished her classes. And speaking in that, because this was in the era where the recitation was a really big deal, and civics was a big deal, and recitation, and taking a great speech and reciting it, and there were contests all over the place. I think the remnant of that survived is the spelling bees, but it used to be a lot more on elocution and oration and all those great things. And that's what she was doing, because she was teaching us the archaic English. and boy, did that serve me well in working on the Hill and working with legalese and legislative changes, just because being familiar with Italian and Latin somewhat, and archaic English, and knowing what res judicata is something that a lot of lawyers don't know or haven't experienced. So that really helped a lot in my understanding, because I didn't have a steep learning curve. I already had the basics in a lot of different things. And of course, it took me to performance and theater. I loved that, and did performance and theater until I moved to New York, and when I was 19, and the end of 1964, and lived there until the end of 1974, and worked in theater, wrote poetry, recited poetry at famous places with famous people and people who were not famous. And that took me into journalism, and print journalism and broadcast journalism, and into broadcast production and directing. And so I did a lot of theater directing and acting, and then working at WBAI Radio which was the free speech flagship station in New York of the Pacifica network, which had stations in LA and San Francisco and Washington, D.C., still does, and in Houston. And we had affiliates with Canadian and U.S. radio networks. So we did a lot of Native programming that went out on what it was, in effect, national, because the audiences in New York, there was a 6-state area, a 6-state broadcast range. So that was really an important part of my life, was being in New York. And it's where I re-met my husband, Frank Ray Harjo, also Muscogee, who I knew when we were little kids, but hadn't seen him or met him since we were about 12 or 11, I guess. And then re-met him where he was living at Onondaga Nation, and that was the nearest place to New York City that I had found that had ceremonies that were like ours at home. And so I had a lot of friends there and went to ceremonies a lot there, and re-met him and thought, that's who he is. But I thought we were related because his aunts who raised him and my favorite aunt, my dad's favorite sister, were very close, and I thought all of them were my aunts. They together, the three of them, had done lots and lots of interviews, recorded interviews with elders about language and how it's changed, and telling stories and singing songs. Just a treasure trove of material that they had, and of Muscogee history and Muscogee language. And so they were doing the Muscogee English Muscogee dictionary, an updated one. And then there was a change in leadership in the Muscogee Nation, and all of their work was gone. It was just disappeared, and they never found it.
Really?
And I had thought, for years, put out the word here and there, if anyone has seen anything like this, get it back, because it's disintegrating, and we need to have that, and because it was years of their work, and 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 work that could never be duplicated because it was from people who knew an old style Muscogee and still spoke it, knew a ceremonial Muscogee that wasn't often spoken, and who knew certain songs that no one did, that weren't known generally. So anyway, I thought these my husband's aunts were my aunts too, maybe a little more distant than my own. And so I called my dad and said, how about who are these? So he talked for about an hour. But for me, it was good news that we weren't related. We had Harjo relatives. My husband was a Harjo. But that didn't mean anything because Harjo is one of the names that the Muscogees during the Trails of Tears took. A lot of Muscogee people did not give their own names, but they gave the name of warrior societies, either ones they were a part of, like the Hajos, or in Fixicos, or they gave the name of a position like a Miko or meaning chief, or Yahola, the singing doctor, or they gave their grounds names. They gave usually things that wouldn't identify them so much and would allow them to kind of slip away if they needed to. So, and that's why there are so many Harjos amongst the Muscogees and everyone else. It was a name that just spread. It was the only form of resistance that the people could take. They were being wrenched from their homes, and they had, by force, at gun and bayonet point. So they had no way to resist except internal resistance, or to not give their correct personal name, and just say, I'm a warrior. I'm a Hadja. So that's why you hear certain names over and over and over again amongst the people who were forced marched and removed from what's now the Southeast United States. And I'm sure that's true with all the other nations that were removed all over the country, because it didn't just happen to the Southeast. It didn't just happen to the Cherokees. It didn't just happen to the Muscogees. It happened to everyone. The Potawatomis were a huge target because they were numerous, they were smart, they were rich, they had everything going for them, and had a superior civilization to that of the people who came here. And so they were a target. Anyone who fit that bill was a target. So I was delighted that my husband and I were not, the person I had re-met at Onondaga Nation was not my relative. And so that meant good to go.
which is always the the question growing up on the res,
Absolutely.
Yep. Consult with your parents, to delicately ask the question is, who's so-and-so's grandfather or grandmother,
It's not a matter of, well, it's your second cousin. That's okay. It doesn't matter. Cousin, intermarriage, whatever it is, by marriage or family direct, a relative is a relative.
I agree.
And no. So anyway, that's So my husband was a great influence on me. A woman named Carolyn Goodman was a great influence on me, person I met in New York, who kind of adopted me. And she was very famous because she was the mother of the Goodman of Goodman, Swerner, and Cheney, the civil rights workers who were killed. They were murdered in Mississippi. And it took a long time for someone to give up the information about where they were buried, which was in their car and where the car was. And it would not have been found, for centuries probably, without someone given that detail. And Carolyn contacted the other mothers, and they did. She was a psychologist, and she with an actual practice and everything. And she and the other mothers became the PR group. They became the mothers of the civil rights movement for a while, especially of young people who were going into these dangerous places to do the people's work. And so all of that had occurred before I met her. I met her in New York when she was doing another kind of work. She and her husband had one of these great places on the Upper West Side of New York, which were the apartments were some of them half a block wide and long, and just massive apartments. And over the years, they would be chopped up and made into 4 and 5 apartments. But the Upper West Side was a place where, and Upper East Side too, but the Upper West Side is the place where people who couldn't afford Upper East Side had these wonderful, just massive apartments. So she and her husband converted. Her office was in their apartment, so they converted the whole thing to living space, an office for him, an office for her, and then place for their salon. And I thought salons were the things you read about that expats developed in France and Paris. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda and Gertrude Stein and the like.
Sure.
And well, that's what she was doing. Was she had a salon, and we met, and she invited me to her salon. And what she would do is mix and match people. And one time, shortly after I was at the first salon, she had a lunch at her place again for me and Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, who were the most prominent theater people who were Black actors and directors, and they were really well known in New York. And so she thought that they would be able to help me, and that I could teach them a lot of things. And so we had a great friendship, which lasted, throughout their lifetime. And I really appreciated that. And that's true of many other people that she introduced me to. And just the fact of being at Carolyn Goodman's place kind of put you on the map of New York theater, New York literary society. So it was nothing to have Joe Papp, when he was developing the public theater, to invite me to places, and Joe Chaikin from the Open Theater, same thing. So I was always working. And because I found out what I didn't know, that you can't make money being a poet. Or at least most can't. And although that was the thing I'd done longest and loved most.
Mhm.
But you could make money being an actor or voice actor or hand actor. I did a lot of different, 2-hour jobs or half-day jobs, a day job. And if I really needed money, I would go to where they were, where you go to where the game shows had television uh, tryout audiences. And so you'd be tried out as an audience member. And if you showed up as an audience member, you could have $5 the day of that. And which, sometimes was very important. And from that group, though, they would try you out as a contestant. And I was very good at being called on and, making myself visible. And then very good at the first round of any of these game shows. And I was not so good at, second or third round. But that was fine with me because you do this and you get your $50 for being an early contestant. So I did a lot of that. And sometimes you don't even go on the actual show, or this is the way they used to do it. You would just do your tryout, and that would be filmed as if it were a show. And then they would decide whether to use it or not. So there were things that you just said, oh, it's a job. It's a, someone asked me one time, how do you avoid writer's block? I said, well, you just, put on your shirt, your sweatshirt or your t-shirt that says I'm a writer and this is a job. This is my job today is to do this. Well, that really developed from, swimming and playing sports. But it also developed from those days of just having a job, of doing something that that didn't feel like you were going backward or losing, or it all felt like progress because it was experience. And I learned a little bit about game shows and how interesting that was, and then I was glad for the money. And even if I didn't feel like doing it, I could still put on my shirt that said I'm a game show fan and go and pick up some change. So that's that sort of life in New York in the late 60s and early 70s. And I volunteered at WBAI radio station, and then I was hired as a programmer, as a producer in the drama and literature department, and did a lot of really terrific programs, usually with a lot of people. It's like anything, it's very collaborative. And then the person who hired me, Milton Hoffman, who was another great influence on my life, was leaving because he was hired by the local public television station. So he was making a huge money leap for him and career leap from radio to television. And he took his job very seriously at WBAI of trying to make a better station. And so he told the program director and the administrator of the radio station, the station manager, that he wanted me to replace him. And he said, because we've never had in management and in the directorship a woman. We've never had a person of color. And she has both of those going for her. And she knows her stuff. She's a poet and she's a writer and she's this and that, and has a lot of theater experience, directing and writing and acting. And so that really made a difference in my life. um, uh, in several ways. One, in just the ability to do it and to be able to carry out. Well, I had a third of the airtime of a 24-hour station to fill, and that's a lot of airtime. And that means you rely on a lot of different programmers and producers, and they pitch an idea and they say, I can do this as a series, or I can do this in one part. And you figure out how to make that work in your time slots. Um, and then, sometimes you have a direct role in what they've done. And then things come to you. William Burroughs had contacted me, out of the blue, and he was a banned book author, having done Naked Lunch, and he asked if I would be interested in producing Naked Lunch if he did a radio adaptation, and which he was in the middle of. And I said, of course, we were the free speech radio station, and all banned book authors welcome. Get in line first. So, and Joe Chaikin he called one day and said that he had gotten 3 short plays written for radio by Samuel Beckett. And I said, oh, that's fabulous. What did they like? And he said, well, I can read them to you, or I can come see you. And he said, if I direct them, would you produce them? So, well, of course. I mean, you don't even have to ask. And so there were things like that I had a pretty successful run because of things like that happen. And anything in New York is a great place for always being able to book someone. You always are able to get an actor who's even the best known actor in New York is out of work most of the time. And either they're fresh off a great hit or a miss, but they can be really well known. And then when they're willing to do something that you've dreamed up for on radio, they have no problem doing anything because it's work, and it's something so they can keep their chops up. And I had one program, Acting Against Type, that one actress, Colleen Dewhurst, who was one of my role models, she was very a really strong actor. Her husband was George C. Scott, and they were kind of they were very much alike, very strong, very, some people would say gruff, but just
Sure.
super strong.
Sure.
And she wanted to do Juliet. She said, I've never been able to do an ingenue. She said, but I can do it by voice. And by golly, she did. She was fabulous. And then events would happen. When the first Watergate tapes became available through court order, the station sent a runner to an Eastern Airline shuttle to Washington, D.C. to stand in line and get from the GPO, the government printing office, the transcripts from the tapes. So then we had people standing by their Xerox machines as soon as he arrived, then people would distribute certain pages then we had people I had called the best cold readers available, and or that I thought were best cold readers, and indeed they were, because they had to read it just hot off the Xerox machine.
Sure.
And Tammy Grimes, who was a wonderful actress, played Nixon, and she had a voice that was sort of like this, and she would say, and throughout there would be lots of cursing, but it would always say expletive deleted. and then go on with what was said. And she would read it like this: expletive deleted. We're just making it wonderful, and that's what good actors can do. And just having her voice and her um, playfulness about it, uh, reading this stuff that was just insanely evil, um, and said so casually, was pretty wonderful. And other people, Geraldine Page and Rip Torn were readers, and others were. It was just a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And so we were able to do lots of things like that, in addition to what my husband and I did. And we would call in lots of Native people who live in New York, and and teach them things. We taught them how to slice. Um, you had to edit by hand, wasn't digital, and how to do that, how to edit tape, how they would work with our techies on just how you position a mic, how you do this, how you do that, and so we had that happening, and we had a lot of programming, especially Seeing Red, which is our first Native news and culture and arts program. That was, I think, was the first one that was national and that was regularly scheduled. And I mean, I don't know. I never met anyone who did one like it earlier. And when we became the radio part of the new American Indian Press Association, there were only 5 of us. I mean, there were more because more people, but only 5 programs were in that radio section. So we were able to do news. We were able to work very closely with Richard LaCourse at American Indian Press Association, whose job I took after he left, after he got burned out in Washington, and caught me at a very vulnerable time when the third near miss that my husband and our son had, where they almost got killed. And I just thought, we really have to get out of New York. And one was a knifing and robbery in Grand Central Station, and that was, they got off with, out of scratch, great. Another was a carbon monoxide poisoning, where people who worked in the next building were working on a hot car, and it was winter, and they crawled in the car and turned on the heater to get warm. And by the time I got home, fortunately for all of us, I worked at the radio station almost all night. I got home and I heard a motor running, and went upstairs, and my husband and baby were rubber-legged, and I understood what was happening. I mean, I put it together right away and got them up to another floor and opened up all the windows, because I heard it almost like a message, from dim memory somewhere. The carbon monoxide poisoning is instantly reversible with fresh air. So, that's what you do. Went downstairs and kicked in the door, a steel door with one of those steel arms, that if I hadn't been so adrenaline filled, I would not have been able to do, but I did, and saw the man in the back seat was dead, and the man in the front seat was in rough shape. So I pulled him out onto the floor of the garage and revived him. One thing about our school in Italy was You learned all of the emergency medical things. And I was a lifeguard as well as a swimmer. And you had to take all sorts of, if you're ocean swimming, you have to know lots about how to revive others, how to save yourself
Sure.
in tough waters. And so, it was yucky, but I knew exactly how to revive him. And he did live, actually. We didn't know either one of them. But so that, and another thing was a car wreck where someone ran a red light and hit the car my husband was in, holding our child, and he had seen it coming, so he turned his body to protect our son, and so his body took the full brunt of this car coming into them. And so it was I went to the hospital to see him and to see how our son was doing. And he was in traction, and had broken leg, seriously broken leg.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got home, Richard LaCourse from Indian Press, who was our very, very close friend, called and said, I've got to leave Washington. I can't tell you how crazy I am here. I'm overextended. I've overworked. I can't do it anymore. And I talked to the board, and would you take my job? Is there any way you could? And I said, yeah. I said, how long are you going to stay? And he said, 2 weeks only. Holy cow. So I had to go back and tell my husband we're moving to Washington, which was horrible. But I was so sure that the next time something happened to them, that they would die. And even though we loved everything we were doing at the radio station, we also we were on the faculty of NYU. We taught of the School for Continuing Education. We taught a 1 semester lecture course on Native rights and Native peoples. And for 6 years, we did that. And I had many other things that we were doing. And in New York, if you're a young person and really energetic and ambitious and, doing things that you love, you're always doing 25 things. So that was it. And that's how we came to the sleepy southern town of Washington, where my beat was Capitol Hill. Okay, all these things we've been talking about, like how do we fix the problem of our ancestors being prisoners in these museums? So that's the kind of thing that we were doing in New York and in Washington. Along with doing that in New York, we've been doing, when you go to ceremonies, you go to your own places, but eventually, if you do the kind of work that involves advocacy or religious freedom stuff, you're always being involved with other people and going to their ceremonies. And so we were traveling all around the country and serving our job at the radio station, but really serving our Indian rights job and doing a lot of preparation. And our first one that we had as a coalition was in 1967 at Bear Butte in South Dakota. And that was to figure out what we were going to do to get our people back who are being held prisoners in these repositories, museums and the like, and schools. And how do we, people were saying how the museums are awful and we've had this experience and that experience. And someone asked the question, is there anyone that's doing it right? And where it's been done well? No, that was what we figured out. And so we began to make one, but none of us knew what to do. We didn't know exactly how you did that. So we were building a coalition from 67 till the early 70s. And then we realized we had to make another law to take the place of the civilization regulations, which had lasted from the 1880s to the 1930s, and were so stringent. They had outlawed everything that made us Native people and criminalized everything. And we, and a lot of religions and languages went underground and never reemerged. And some were reemerging, but we needed a law to say the opposite of what a half century under the civilization regs had done. And that was the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. And that was a pretty big deal. It was a U.S. declaration that it is the policy of the United States of America to preserve and protect the traditional religions of the Aleut, of the American Indian, the Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiians. So it was broad. It was hemisphere wide, and American wide. And so we had been, so in covering, and we'd learned a lot. I mean, we had gone to Washington and done a lot of radio shows that had to do with contemporary issues. Certainly Watergate had covered a lot of hearings and done a lot of interviews that had to do with Native laws that were in the making. So we were really learning about the nitty-gritty and the flow of legislative work generally, and the stages of it. So we and from just covering it. And one thing that was very clear was there were no Native people who were doing that work to make those laws. There was one Native woman on one committee, the Indian Civil Rights Committee, for a while. And then she was working at National Congress of American Indians, sort of before and after that. And there was one Native man, it was Blackfeet, and he was working for Senator Jackson, who was the head of the Interior and Insular Affairs Committee in the Senate, which meant that he was also in charge, the chairman of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and related agencies. But there were no lobbyists no legislative aides, no legislative liaisons, no Native lawyers who were doing that. And so anyway, pretty soon there was a fail for the American Indian Press Association. No one told me they were broke before we got there. And and maybe it wouldn't have made any difference, but as soon as we got there, I had to call Carolyn Goodman and Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and other people I knew in New York to say, we need a lot of cash to keep this thing going. They'd say, oh, okay. So they kept the American Indian Press Association going for a while. And then it became clear that I just had to do something else. And so I jumped into advocacy, which was, I thought it was easier for me to learn the legal stuff than it was for the white men who were doing it to learn the Indian stuff. And that's how I got into the nitty gritty of legislation and all the wonky stuff. I learned things that no one really learns. All the rules of the House, the rules of the Senate, how they changed, why they changed. The anthropology of the Senate, the genealogy of the House, what has changed, what systems and that sort of thing. So it really made me pretty successful in doing a lot of work, and it was before Native peoples had money. Now it's a different kind of lobbying for the world, I think, but certainly for Native peoples, because there's a lot of money involved. And what we were doing, what I was doing, and what others, a few others like me, were doing at the time that we were getting lots of really good legislation, was offering people a chance to be statesmen and stateswomen. Which they didn't get to be very often. They didn't really get to be Robin Hood, or they didn't get to be the hero. They did, stuff that wasn't very heroic. And so that appealed to a lot of people. And then following some very sage advice I had gotten from people like Senator Barry Goldwater and Representative Morris Udall. I was always the Arizona delegation was always very receptive, because they were used to lots of Native people, and so they had Native issues and tough ones. So Udall used to say things like, "No one's 100%. Nothing is 100%. If you've negotiated something and you are getting 75%, you're getting something. I mean, and it's better than nothing. And if you have someone who is championing your bill and they're with you 3/4 of the time, but not with you and maybe opposed to you for that 25%, you can't say, well, now they're the enemy. There are no permanent friends. There are no permanent enemies. You're operating on a different plane. It was such good advice that I had gotten. I mean, along with practical things, like one member of Congress told me, if you're going to work here, you really need to go to the bathroom every time you pass. Never chance that you're going to find another one quickly, or that you're going to so people
That's
have
experience talking.
experience. People will catch you in the hallway and want to have a meeting, and you have a little meeting, but then the next person wants. So those kinds of things they really stuck with me, and it was a good time to be there, because it was after Nixon had resigned and after the lines had been drawn very carefully in Washington. And there was a sense of reform, of trying to do justice in an unjust system. There were people who were willing to accept that there were systemic reasons that you haven't gotten this kind of freedom over this kind of freedom, and you've been penalized, or you have barriers placed in the way of the exercise of certain freedoms. They were willing to accept that in a way that they hadn't been, or might not have done, prior to the revelations of Watergate. And just seeing how quickly a whole system was developed around corruption and affiliation, cross currents of corruption. So all of that was really important, and was kind of what led me to do the legislative work. And then in 1976, I looked around the field of who was running for president, and some were my friends. I mean, Morris Udall was a friend, and he was running, and lots of people were running who I thought highly of and admired. and knew well enough to understand their character. And but I had a premonition that it would be Jimmy Carter, that he would. Well, I thought, Jimmy Carter. I mean, this is Georgia Cracker. No, he's not. He's New South governor. And anyway, I joined up volunteering on the campaign, and then got on staff right at the end of it and organized the meeting, the policy meeting that he had with Native leaders, and got to script both sides and all that. And then when he was and that laid out his legislative agenda, and he kept every promise he made in that meeting. And that was, to sign and embrace and work for the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act, the Tribally Controlled Community Colleges Act, uh, all of these just laws that you can't imagine not having them before, but we didn't. And a lot of the follow-up to the Alaska Native Settlement Act, making what they call the D2 lands, all of the subsistence lands, to be protected, and environmental lands that are necessary to the subsistence and to just the whole ecosystem protected. And that, for that, President Carter, who had promised to do this, did through executive fiat by proclaiming under the Antiquities Act hundreds of millions of acres of land in Alaska, as had been promised in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, but not lived up to, not fulfilled. So he did that, and water rights settlements that had been waiting executive action for a long time. The first of the Eastern land claims, he did the Rhode Island claim and the Maine Indian land settlement, and 300,000 acres and $87.5 million. I mean, these were big things that he had promised and was doing, and then he did the things that he hadn't promised, that hadn't been known about, and or that we hadn't anticipated, but there were opportunities open because the new chairman of this committee was interested in education, and we had an ability to have Native interests inserted in the Education Act in a way that we hadn't before, because it wasn't a pet issue, or the leadership wasn't quite responsive or interested. So, because you have to, a friend of mine was Howie Simons, who was the managing editor of the Washington Post for a long time during the Watergate period and into the 80s. And he used to say, you have to scratch people's minds where they don't know they have an itch. Wow, that's really so important, isn't it? And I've applied that in so many things, legislative things and curation. And it, because of him, I mean, talk about influences, that he influenced almost everything that I've done, just because he came from a totally different world. And like Carolyn Goodman, he adopted me and was so kind when I would ask dumb questions. Howie, does everyone really capitalize Hill when you mean the Hill? Isn't that just pretentious? Well, yeah, it's awfully pretentious. Definitely, stupidly pretentious. But yes, you always capitalize the Hill. Oh, all right. He saved me a lot of embarrassment in a lot of ways, by understanding that I really was smarter than I sounded. Yeah.
But you were asking the questions that needed to be asked to the right people at the time.
Yes.
For sure.
Who were kind enough to invest time in me. Yeah. Say, this person I can help. I can do something about this by helping this person. And I thought that was, I just had a lot of people like that in my life.
And that does it for this episode of 5 Plain Questions. I want to thank Suzan again for her time and sharing her story with us. This interview has been a long time coming, and this has been worth the wait. Her generosity of time and knowledge is so deeply appreciated. And like my dad's experience with her before, I am grateful for the time that I've been able to spend with her and to listen to her stories. So, Suzan, thank you. So this is a two-parter. So we will be back next time with part 2, the other questions. And I'm really excited to share that part of the conversation with you as well. I also want to thank you for joining us and spending your time listening to what I feel is a very important story and perspective from our community. So please, join us next time as we speak with another incredible person. I'm Joe Williams. Thank you for listening to 5 Plain Questions. Your support keeps these conversations going. You can follow us on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And to stay connected, visit us at 11warriorarts.com to explore past episodes, check out our exclusive merch, and to sign up for our upcoming newsletter. It's been a while coming, but it'll be here shortly. So just know that every listen, share, and purchase helps support this podcast. Support from this podcast also comes from Art of the Rural, working to advance rural culture and equity through collaboration, media, and the arts. And also subscribe to them on Substack. You will hear some great interviews, you will see amazing articles, and you'll see contributions from myself as well. So, well, that does it. You take care, and I'll see you next time. This has been an 11 Warrior Arts production.